whenever I start to think in terms of am I happy or not happy or whatever, it's always whatever I expect versus what I get. That distance between those two is my level of contentment. I have a tattoo on this side of my arm that says, I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free. How do you get free? If I really don't have grandiose expectations, I can be happy and content with very little. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Mind Muscle Connection. I'm Joe Klemzewski with Tyler Weeb. Today, we're going to talk about coping, which at first glance, I think has kind of a negative connotation. When you hear that word, oh, that's just you coping, or that's a coping mechanism. We tend to think of it as some kind of a distance provision away from something that we don't want. So here's something bad, I have to cope. But in truth, it's a psychological axiom that we all have to do. We all have to cope with adversity in one way or the other. I would argue, just with my experience or education in psych and soc, that there are better ways to cope than others. But at the same time, there's also something kind of developmental to that and what we really can handle. And the fact that over time, we as a species have developed different ways of coping that were necessary, perhaps, for our psychological survival. But anyway, when I brought this up to you, Tyler, what did you think of initially when you heard that word, like, oh, we're going to talk about coping?
Yeah, I think, I went through kind of what you talked about, the initial thought of, yeah, it's typically considered that negative connotation where, you hear a lot of, coping with the stress of this or that. And beyond that, then you kind of start to go, okay, well, then again, like you pretty much kind of went through my thought process when you first brought it up is, okay, well, now we're coming to maybe more of the existential coping, and how, we've created a lot of ways to save ourselves psychologically. Actually, the first thing one of the other first things I thought of, and I can see it right here, was the book, The Denial of Death. That, really kind of was one of the things. And then, and then as you were kind of going through that introduction, it started to shift to, the positive side of coping and, how it is can be a defense mechanism, for our body that, in ways can be positive and how it can protect itself and how it can protect us. And, how you said, with how we cope with adversity, can lead to a lot of growth. Do we cope in a negative way where whatever, shut down, ignore, move away from whatever that adversity might be? Or, do we look at that adversity and go, okay, how can I cope with this in a positive way? And I think, you maybe hear different terminology when people are talking about, how we, can thrive through adversity, can learn a lot of things. I mean, it's a form of coping, but the positive way of doing it. So just like anything we kind of talk about and seem to like to take to extremes, there's positives and negatives, and it's going to be about context and how much you are able to handle. So yeah, I think both of our thoughts kind of went the same route. When you first brought this up, for sure.
So one of my favorite bands, Manchester Orchestra, has an album called Cope. And looking at it, it's almost a concept album where you see kind of a lot of angst. Matter of fact, Andy Hall, the founder of the band, had a side project of his own called Right Away Great Captain. And this was 4 or 5 kind of demo laced albums or collections, and just painful. Like if you need some sad songs, like go to Right Away Great Captain, Andy Hall. And you could see him in his life traversing some of these bad times. And in this album, Cope, the song Cope, there's a couple lyrics I want to read to you. There is a cost, my friends, of living out some other dream to find the consequence, and et cetera, et cetera. I hope if there's one thing I let go, it is the way we cope. And so the interesting thing is, there's even a spiritual song. Like he just high drama in this very sad song about the little girl who dies. and he talks about this group who's trying to pretend like it's not sad, like it's probably in a religious context, like, oh, she's just in a better place. And it's like, no, what are you talking about? Like, this is devastating. You should be sad. You should be grieving. And then he wrote another album called Hope, which was re-recording all of those songs in a very somber, beautiful way, almost acoustic. And so this is a guy, I bring this up because you don't write an album called Cope dealing with those contexts without having some depth and some experience. And if you interpret his writing like I am, he was really struggling with exactly what we're describing. Like, there's good ways we cope and bad ways we cope. And I think if you just look, first of all, at kind of Psych 101 at this topic, there is emotional coping, how we think of things, and then there's actual problem solving coping. What do we do about this thing with which is causing so much stress that we need to cope? And, to your death of denial, that is certainly one of the worst, which is to just ignore it. And psychologists call this positive toxicity, or some kind of misplaced positivity that, oh, we're just going to pretend like nothing's wrong. We'll just be happy and everything will be okay. And that's not really coping in a positive way. So when things really go south in the weeb ecosystem, like, how do you deal with stress or
Yeah.
disappointment or trauma?
Yeah. Um, you know, that's a good question. I would say my initial reaction, my default is to want to shut down, completely, kind of just completely internalize, completely shut down, block everybody out, and run through that vicious circle of frustration and being very self-aware of what you're doing and how negatively this is even affecting people around you. I would certainly say that has been my default for many many years, and it's part of the reason why I went to therapy for quite some time to work through a lot of that kind of internalization, and being more comfortable with understanding the emotions and where they might be coming from, and that it can be okay to shut down for a time if that's what is needed to understand my thoughts and emotions better. But it does have to then come back around to that positive side of coping where that needs to be shared with whomever's the closest. And I mean, that's typically Steph. And so I would say that has been the work I have been putting in and working on, and not just having that negative side, but having that balance of negative and positive, because what that was doing was just creating this milieu of self-hate and depression and frustration, where now when you have that yin and that yang, you're really able to balance that out. You're able to work through those emotions, understand those emotions a lot better. And just from what I've found, like, the more and more you can do it, the easier it gets. And I find that I can handle a lot more adversity than I used to be able to, just because I've been able to bring about that positive side of coping into my realm of being a human.
We kind of just went full circle through the whole clinic of what to not do and what to do. When you started saying you withdraw, uh, those you kind of listed like the next two or three things not to do. Isolate, repress, withdraw, because I mean, yeah, you're dealing with something that is best dealt with support. And so to go to the problem solving side, because the emotion, it doesn't mean that you just leave the emotion to the problem solving side. There's still an emotional way to do this properly, and it's very process oriented. It's, okay, I feel this, it's real, it's disappointment or frustration or a very serious change in my life, and like, I need to give myself the time and the space and maybe the external support to literally cope with this. It's not, again, I have to reiterate, it's not coping as like I'm just putting it to the side. It's really dealing with it. So I also think there has to be something on the other side of the ledger, because the how to attack the problem, which could be very, very pragmatic. It's like, well, here's a very bad thing that happened. How do I take care of this? Here's what I can do today. I need to make this one phone call, or I need to have this conversation with this person to apologize or ask for clarification, or I need to do this. Like, the deeper you dig into that thing, most of the time we realize, wow, like it's resolved now. I don't have to cope with anything because it's taken care of. But when we sit there and ruminate on it, it gets horrible. But I have to bring back up Schopenhauer. I think it was him who talked about expectation, which is also one of my just intellectual schemas. Whenever I start to think in terms of, am I happy or not happy or whatever, it's always whatever I expect versus what I get. That distance between those two is my level of contentment. And so maybe I'm just expecting the wrong things. And I have a tattoo on this side of my arm that says, I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free. And I wanted to get the citation right. That's what I was looking down. I wanted to make sure I knew how to pronounce his name. It's Nikos Kazantzakis, a kind of a modern 20th century Greek philosopher. It's tremendous writings on other things. But again, think of that. It's so important to me. I have it on my body. I hope for nothing. It sounds kind of nihilistic, right? Like, I fear nothing. I am free. How do you get free? If I really don't have grandiose expectations, I can be happy and content with very little. I can be ecstatic when life goes beyond that, but dealing with a life that has just as much sorrow as elation, you're going to have a really tough road if you expect everything to always be roses.
Yeah, it'll definitely put you, on your ass. And, Steph and I were kind of just actually talking about this recently. And, for her, she is such a go-getter, like very accomplished throughout her life, hasn't failed much, but for a reason. It's not like she's fallen into it. And recently there's been just an event in her life where things haven't gone the way she expected, and it has been tough. And just seeing that, and just being able to have that full understanding where, like, this is kind of the majority of life. Like, it's just gonna be hard, it's gonna be tough. You're probably going to have more fails than major successes in those grandiose terms of maybe our expectations. And so, yeah, being able to lower those expectations but still hold yourself to a high standard, right? It kind of feels like like a misnomer, where it's like, well, I can be completely content with a little. That doesn't mean that we're not continually striving to become better and to do more. It's being content within the moment of what you currently have and what is currently available to you. And so, yeah, just even being able to kind of see this in real time, and watch someone who I've known her for 12, 13 years now, go through this transformation process of how to learn to cope with failure in both ways, has been really intriguing, because I went through it myself earlier this year. So we're very happy we both didn't hit this at the same time. But being able to be on both sides of it within the span of kind of a year, it's been very interesting. And I think what I've really found is, as much as it's been negative, and some days have been quite tough emotionally, there's been weeks, you keep showing up, we keep communicating with each other, you keep showing up for each other, you continue to remind yourself of that. And this what we've been able to learn about ourselves, how we've been able to grow together, separately, all of that kind of stuff, like, has taken us to a whole nother level. So I think it's always so important to remember and to have the expectation that it isn't going to be easy, but if you can continue to kind of show up each day, the fruits of that labor are just going to be, cannot not be astounding. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to learn something and you're going to get something positive out of it. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, you brought up my last 2 points, which are there is going to be coping. You're going to have to cope, period. And the thing that you just said about becoming stronger through it is how we understand weightlifting and sport and competition is you grow through resistance. And so you shouldn't hope for an easy life. That's going to get you nowhere, except that's just going to make you weaker. And so I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and I said, I feel happier and more balanced and able to kind of shut down work and just do the things that I need to without as much turmoil and stress as in other parts of my life. And part of it is because I have literally lived a lot of shit storms. I've worked through those things, but at the same time, I was raising 4 kids. I was growing companies. I had a lot of people to be responsible to and for. I had, 200, or more licensed clinicians at one time, who needed my support. I had 200 to 300 clients at a time. I am scaled back in all of those things. And so it is simply easier for me now. So to your point about going through a lot of stuff with a child and, two people working on their occupations, you're in the middle of the hardest part of life. Statistically, that shows, and
Yeah.
people's contentment really starts to sink right where you are. And then right where I'm at, it comes back up and peaks. And so there's that kind of a context, which is one of the things that you opened up with is that, you're going to face different things and there's not a right or wrong answer. There's just, I'm going to deal with this well, or I'm not. I'm going to cope well, or I'm not.
Yeah. It's funny that you said that because that was something we were even talking about as well. It's like life's like been so easy. I was like, yeah, I don't think life is like that. The percentages are starting to swing the other way. Like, it's just going to be the law of averages. Like, the longer period you go with some, things being great, higher chance that something bad is coming right around the corner, right?
Oh,
So,
the worst for you is ahead. I'm afraid to tell you.
and yeah, I mean,
Whatever you're going through now, be happy that that's strengthening you for what's to come.
for sure, for sure. And again, like, and I think that's very much how, I try and look at it. And I try not to get too high, too low, try and stay a little bit more settled, let things roll off the back a little bit more because yeah, it is just going to get harder. It is just going to be more difficult. Man, settle in. Hopefully you got another 60 years of this of just grinding, each day away. So yeah, really being able to, again, coming back to enjoying, the present moment and then, presently what you have and being content, but still striving to be better. Like, that's that, that back and forth.
So I'm going to wrap up with this. Another conversation I had today with a friend. I have such good friends. I get to have all these great, great,
Yeah.
deep conversations. But as we were talking about this, as it was on my mind to prepare for this, I said, I wouldn't be the person I am academically or intellectually without the physical pursuits I have engaged in. And our fitness community, our hard charging competition community, we're already doing something so helpful in that we have an outlet. A coping mechanism we have is the biological and the psychological release of going into a gym and just pouring it out. Like, if not that, what are you gonna do? Just punch a wall? Are you gonna you're gonna have some outlet because that's part of our biochemistry. And sometimes that's repressed, as I said, and it just festers inside because you're isolating. It is so healthy to have these outside pursuits, both intellectually and physically, where you just have other things you can at least take those problems that you're trying to cope your way through and put them on pause, or maybe you're kind of sorting them out in your brain as you're on the treadmill. And there's so much that goes through that reciprocal neurological stimuli, the mind muscle connection, so to speak.
Yeah.
There's a real synchronistic help there that we're not going to go into, a totally different topic. But man, you are doing more for yourself than you think just by taking care of yourself physically in your ability to manage life's down times.
Yeah, I can't give you a number on how many chings or little light bulbs go off just in the middle of a workout. The things are just running on a subconscious level. Things I've been thinking about, for however much time, and middle of a set, or resting in between a set. It's like, oh, okay, like it just kind of bubbles to the surface. So yeah, I think there's something to be really said about having some type of physical pursuit where you can maybe just allow that subconscious mind to kind of give you that answer.
I everybody says that, even academics who aren't into the kind of training that we are. I've talked to writers who are like, who are just, they'll just go for a walk. Like they're not people who train, and like, oh yeah, that was my greatest book idea I ever had was on that walk. It's oxygen. First of all, you can't have an active brain without oxygenation. But there's something about, again, the sympathetic nervous system being stimulated and in this groove of synchrony, so your subconscious can kind of coast along those waves. And again, I'm not explaining it with the type of context it needs, but that's real. Like that's a very biophysical thing. And I guarantee, dude, I mean, I have a notepad in my gym just for that reason. Like the best ideas I have come then.
Yep. Yeah. I've done, like, let's say I'm on my phone. I've got like a notepad, and it's just like literally the ideas I've had at the gym, and it's full.
It's stress relief. That's part of
Yeah.
coping. But anyway, thanks. I knew you would really like this because it's something that you thought about and worked through as well, Tyler. And those of you guys who watch and listen, again, thanks for some of your comments. Had a great comment from a listener here recently as well. And some of these ideas come from those discussions afterwards. So keep those up, guys, and we'll see you next time in the Mind Muscle Connection.